I never thought it would come to this. Not once in our 10 years of marriage did I imagine sitting in our dimly lit living room, waiting for my wife to return from her date with another man. It was a surreal situation, one that twisted my gut in ways I couldn't describe. Yet, here I was, pretending like I didn't know, pretending that the woman I loved wasn't out in the arms of someone else, while my mind raced with plans for the moment she walked through that door. My wife Sarah wasn't the cheating type. At least that's what I had always believed. She was the sweet, caring woman who would do anything for her family. We built a life together. A good life, I thought. But over the past few months, things had shifted. It was subtle at first, a little more distance in her eyes, a few more nights out with friends that didn't quite add up, and conversations that were suddenly interrupted by her glued phone screen. I didn't want to admit it at first, chalking it up to stress or work, but the signs were all there. Sarah was hiding something, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the truth. But tonight, I didn't have a choice. I had followed her earlier in the evening, a decision I never thought I'd make. Desperation drove me there, to the restaurant where I saw her with him, her lover. They laughed, touched hands across the table, shared private smiles that once belonged to me. My chest tightened, my fists clenched, but I stayed hidden, frozen in a mix of rage and disbelief. The woman I knew was gone, and in her place was someone who could deceive me so easily. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to make a scene, but I held back. Confrontation wasn't what I needed at that moment. I needed her to come home, unaware that I knew. I wanted to see the look on her face when she walked into the house thinking everything was normal, oblivious to the fact that I had discovered her secret. As the hours passed, I waited, replaying the scene in my head. Her laughter, his touch, the way she looked at him. My heart ached, yet a cold determination settled over me. Tonight wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about what came next, how I would take control of the situation. The sound of the front door unlocking pulled me from my thoughts and my pulse quickened. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding in my ears as Sarah stepped inside, her smile still lingering from the night. She didn't see me right away. Instead, she hummed softly to herself as she kicked off her shoes and set her purse on the counter. It was a chilling contrast, her happiness versus the storm raging inside me. Then she looked up and froze. Her eyes widened in surprise as she finally noticed me sitting there, my gaze fixed on her, unblinking. The color drained from her face, her smile fading into a look of dread. She knew. She knew something was wrong. "David?" she said, her voice shaky, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an explanation that would get her out of this. I didn't respond at first, just kept staring at her. My mind was racing, trying to decide what words to use, how to even start. But there was nothing that could capture the depth of my hurt, my anger, and my resolve. "How was your night?" I finally asked, my tone deceptively calm. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed nervously. I was just out with some friends." Friends. The lie sounded so pathetic, especially after what I'd seen. She wasn't with friends. She was with him. I stood up slowly, watching her flinch at the movement. "Try again," I said, taking a step forward. "Who were you really with, Sarah?" Her face paled even more, if that was possible. "David, Don't lie to me!" My voice rose, anger bubbling to the surface. "I saw you. I followed you. I know exactly where you were and who you were with." Her mouth opened and closed, like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at me, caught in her web of lies. For a moment, I thought she might confess, but instead she crumbled into herself, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, David." I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. I let her break down in front of me, watching as the guilt and shame consumed her. But her tears did nothing to soften the anger that burned inside me. Apologies meant nothing now. "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice cold. You're sorry because you got caught. That's all. If I hadn't followed you, you would have come home like nothing happened, wouldn't you? You'd have kept lying to me, kept cheating on me, until what? Until I was too stupid to notice? She shook her head frantically, wiping at her eyes. No, David, it's not like that. It was a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed, taking another step toward her. You don't accidentally fall into someone else's bed, Sarah. Her sobs grew louder, her body trembling as she stood there, unable to look me in the eye. I should have been furious. I should have wanted to yell, to scream at her for betraying me, but all I felt was this strange, numb clarity. The more she cried, the less I wanted to hear it. Nothing she said could fix what she had done. I loved you, I said, my voice quieter now. I trusted you. I thought we were happy, but you threw it all away. For what? For him? Sarah shook her head again, but the guilt in her eyes betrayed her. She didn't have an answer, and that's what hurt the most. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know why I did it. I never meant to hurt you. I never. But you did. I cut her off. You did hurt me, Sarah. And now, I have to decide what comes next. Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. David, please. I'll do anything. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can talk about it. Please, don't give up on us. I stared at her. The woman I had loved for a decade. The woman who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. But deep down, I knew that something fundamental had shattered between us. Something that couldn't be repaired with words or therapy. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, sobbing into the silence. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at a friend's place, trying to clear my head, while Sarah bombarded me with texts and calls, begging for forgiveness. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every time I saw her name flash on my screen, all I could picture was her with him, laughing and smiling like our marriage meant nothing. I went through the motions of life, but I felt like I was drifting in a fog, disconnected from everything around me. Work was an afterthought. Conversations with friends felt shallow, and every night I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the betrayal in my mind. How had we gotten here? We were the couple that had it all. Love, trust, a future planned out. At least, that's what I thought. Now everything felt like a lie. I kept asking myself the same questions, over and over. Where did I go wrong? Could I have stopped this? Was there something I missed? It wasn't until I met with Sarah for the first time since that night that I began to realize that maybe the cracks had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near our home, a neutral place where we could talk. I didn't know what I was expecting, but when I saw her sitting at the table, her eyes puffy from crying, her hands trembling as she sipped her coffee, I felt a pang of sadness I hadn't anticipated. This was the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had loved more than anything. And now, she was reduced to a shadow of that person, broken by her own choices. David, she said softly when I sat down across from her. Her voice was small, filled with regret. I nodded, not sure what to say. I had spent days thinking about this moment, but now that I was here, the words wouldn't come. I'm sorry, she said, her eyes filling with tears again. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, to us. I don't know how I let it get this far. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why did you do it, Sarah? Why him? She hesitated, biting her lip as if she was trying to find the right words. I don't know, she whispered finally. It started out innocent. We were just talking, and then things got out of control. I didn't mean for it to happen. That's not good enough, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You don't destroy a marriage because of some innocent conversations. There's more to this, Sarah, and I need to know what it is. She looked down at her hands, wringing them together anxiously. I guess I just felt like we were drifting apart. You were always working, and I felt lonely, like I didn't matter anymore. Her words stung, but they also rang true in a way I didn't want to admit. Maybe I had been distant. Maybe I had let work take priority over our relationship, but that didn't excuse what she did. "So you found someone else to fill that void?" I asked bitterly. Sarah's words hung in the air between us like a dark cloud. Loneliness, distance, those were things I hadn't wanted to admit. But hearing them now, spoken aloud, felt like someone had shoved a knife into my chest and twisted it. "I didn't look for it, David," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't. But when I started talking to him, it was just easy. He listened to me in a way I felt like you hadn't in a long time. And then, I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you. I swear." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as I processed her words. The rational part of me wanted to scream that none of this justified cheating. But there was another part, a quieter, sadder part, that wondered if I had failed her in some way. Had I neglected our marriage without even realizing it? "You should have come to me," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "Instead of turning to someone else, you should have told me how you were feeling. We could have worked through it, Sarah. But you didn't. You chose him." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I was selfish, and I regret it every day. But I still love you, David. I want to fix this. I want us to be whole again." Her plea hit me in a place I didn't expect. Despite everything, part of me still loved her, too. The memories of our years together, the good times, the life we had built, they were hard to shake. But the betrayal was there, like a gaping wound that wouldn't close. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said slowly. "What you did, it changed everything." She flinched as if I had slapped her, her tears falling faster. "But we can try, can't we? Please, David, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just give me a chance to make it right." I stared at her, my heart warring with my head. Was it worth trying to save what was left of our marriage? Could I ever look at her the same way again, knowing that she had turned to someone else in my absence? Or was this just the beginning of the end, an inevitable downfall that no amount of effort could stop? "I need time," I said finally, standing up from the table. "I need to think about this, about us." She looked up at me with pleading eyes, but she didn't argue. She nodded, wiping her tears. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait for you." Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Sarah and me grew wider. We still spoke occasionally, but our conversations were strained, polite at best. She stayed at the house, while I found an apartment on the other side of town, needing the space to think clearly. The loneliness that followed was almost unbearable. Every night I replayed our last conversation in the cafe, trying to make sense of it. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, to believe that this was something we could work through. But every time I thought about her with him, laughing, touching, kissing, the anger and betrayal surged back, drowning any hope of reconciliation. Friends and family reached out, offering advice or condolences, but I didn't want to talk about it. This was my burden to bear, my decision to make. No one else could understand the complexity of what I was feeling. I started therapy on my own, hoping to untangle the mess of emotions inside me. My therapist, Dr. Mitchell, was a calm, older man with a kind face. He didn't push me to make decisions, but instead helped me explore the deeper issues in my marriage. The distance, the lack of communication, the ways we had both let things slide over the years. "Marriage isn't just about love," he told me in one session. "It's about effort, compromise, and above all, communication. When that breaks down, even the strongest love can falter." "You and Sarah stopped talking to each other a long time ago, didn't you?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. Sarah's affair didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a symptom of a much larger problem in our relationship. But even knowing that didn't make it easier to forgive her. Is forgiveness possible? I asked him one day, my voice hoarse from emotion. Forgiveness is always possible, Dr. Mitchell said. But that doesn't mean reconciliation is. Sometimes forgiving someone is about letting go of the hurt so you can move on, even if it means moving on without them. It had been almost 2 months since Sarah's confession when I received a call late one night. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted and ready to collapse into bed, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Sarah. I hesitated, staring at her name on the screen. We hadn't spoken in a few days, and part of me wasn't sure I was ready for another emotional conversation. But something in my gut told me to answer. David? Her voice was shaky, almost panicked. What's wrong? I asked, my stomach dropping. I need to tell you something, she said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't want to say anything, but I've been sick. Really sick. My heart pounded in my chest. Sick? What do you mean? I went to the doctor a few weeks ago, she continued, her voice breaking. They ran some tests, and it's cancer, David, stage 3. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to feel sorry for me, but I can't do this alone. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Cancer? The word echoed in my mind, bringing with it a wave of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Anger, fear, sadness. They all collided at once. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't want to add to everything else, but I need you. My chest tightened as I leaned against the counter, trying to process what she had just told me. For months, I had been consumed by the betrayal, the affair, the possibility of divorce. But now, none of that seemed to matter. Sarah was sick, and despite everything, she was still my wife. I'll be there, I said, my voice trembling. Whatever you need, I'll be there. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me took a back seat as Sarah began her treatments. Chemotherapy, doctor's appointments, endless consultations. It was a whirlwind of medical jargon and hospital visits. I was by her side through it all. I moved back into the house, not because we had reconciled, but because Sarah needed me, and I couldn't bear the thought of her going through this alone. Our marriage was still fractured, but there was a new focus now: survival. The affair seemed like a distant memory as we faced this new battle together. Sarah was weak, her body ravaged by the treatments, but she fought with a strength I hadn't seen in her before. There were moments when I saw glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with, and it was those moments that kept me going. But even as we fought side by side, the cracks between us remained. We didn't talk about the affair, didn't talk about the future of our relationship. There was a silent understanding between us. We were united in this battle, but the wounds of the past hadn't healed. Sarah's cancer went into remission 6 months later. It was the news we had both been waiting for, and yet, as I sat in the hospital room with her, I felt a strange emptiness. We had survived the storm, but now we were standing at the edge of a new reality. The question that had been looming over us since the beginning was still there. Could we fix our marriage? Or was it too broken to repair? One evening after she had returned home and regained some of her strength, we sat in the living room, the silence heavy between us. David, she said softly, her voice hesitant. I know we haven't talked about us, and I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I need to know, is there any chance we can still make this work? I looked at her, my heart aching with the weight of everything we had been through. There was still love between us, but there was also so much pain, so much broken trust. Could we ever truly go back to what we had before? I don't know, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. I want to say yes, but the truth is, I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, and I don't know if I can live with that. Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of my words. I love you, Sarah, I continued, my voice steady. But maybe loving each other isn't enough anymore. She wiped her tears, her hands trembling. So, what now? I took a deep breath, feeling the finality of the moment settle over me. I think it's time we let each other go. Her face crumpled in grief, but she nodded, accepting the truth we had both been avoiding. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but in my heart, I knew it was the right one. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was amicable, quiet, nothing like the chaos I had once imagined. Sarah and I remained on good terms. Not friends exactly, but not enemies either. We were two people who had loved deeply, hurt deeply, and in the end, had chosen to walk separate paths. It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was the one we needed. I had learned that sometimes, love isn't enough to heal the wounds that cut too deep. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let go. As I packed the last of my things and moved into my new apartment, I looked out the window at the sunset, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was mine to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward.